Hello and welcome to the Flourishing Center podcast. I'm Emiliya Zhivotovskaya, your host and founder of the Flourishing Center. We are training the change agents of the world and equipping them with research-based tools for healthy, happy, and successful living. And we're so grateful that you're here.
This episode is a Practitioner Profile, where we highlight ordinary people that are doing extraordinary things. Each practitioner is a graduate of the Certificate in Applied Positive Psychology program from the Flourishing Center. Find out the exciting ways that people are putting the science into practice in their work and how they use positive psychology in their lives with individuals, organizations, and communities to help them thrive.
Thanks for listening, and let's dive in. Hello, everybody, and join me in welcoming Dr. Shenell Evans, who is a clinical psychologist tuning in from Brooklyn, New York. She's going to tell us about how she integrates positive psychology into the work that she does as an individualizer with her clients. Something you might not know about Shenell just by meeting her is that one of her all-time favorite movies is Legally Blonde, which I can't wait to hear a little bit more about Shenell as to what makes it your favorite, because I have to say it holds a very sweet spot in my heart as well. And Shenell, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much, Emiliya. Yeah, that movie, it just, every time I watch it, I end up in tears. Maybe I'm such a sap, but I love the inspiration that is woven throughout, and it's just very uplifting. So the way that it leaves me, I guess, is more so what I really love.
That's awesome. I'm sure we could rewatch that movie through the lens of positive psychology and find a lot of great messaging in it. So Shenell, get us started on what brought you to positive psychology.
Positive psychology, what brought me to her? It was a bit of a scavenger hunt, I guess. So I entered my graduate program. Well, actually, this is before graduate school. As an undergrad, ending my undergrad matriculation, I ended up working with a clinical psychologist in a children's hospital, and in doing the rounds with them, I was able to be part of the work being done with the 13-year-old African-American young lady who was being hospitalized for complications due to AIDS. And, the pediatric psych department was brought in to help have this discussion with her. I was not part of that initial discussion, but was able to meet her and help support her during her time in the facility, which was a very lonely time. Her relatives weren't able to visit. So, it was an honor for me to be able to support her during the summer when she'd much rather be outside playing and having fun. But, it was the interactions with her, how much optimism she displayed, how vibrant her energy was. Like, I understand that she didn't, grasp the gravity of like what she had been told in the situation and so forth. But she's, you know, being a teenager. She wants to have fun. She wants to just get out of the hospital, be with her family. So I understand that. But the contrast that I felt in terms of the sense of tragedy, but then seeing her essentially represent triumph or, being uplifted at least, it planted a very special seed within me. And I had to find out what that was called. And I happened upon uh, benefit finding, meaning making. It's kind of I had to sojourn through post-traumatic stress literature to get to the coping and recovery literature, and that led me into learning about positive byproducts, benefit finding, um, allopathic load, and it eventually post-traumatic growth. So post-traumatic growth then was the biggest thing that brought me into positive psychology as a whole. And that was the thread of my pretty much my graduate school career postdoc. I studied post-traumatic growth among people living with HIV and how whether or not there was an influence on their ability to maintain their treatment adherence, which is, something that has to be looked at, but it's usually not looked at from the lens of like what's going well and how can we facilitate that even more. Not just looking at trauma, substance abuse, depression, but like what about religious coping and social support and post-traumatic growth and even coping self-efficacy. Um, so that just had me all in the positive psychology wheelhouse.
That is such an inspiration. Thank you so much for sharing that, Shenell. And I would love if you could tell us a little bit more for those listening who may not be familiar with what post-traumatic growth is. Can you give us a definition and maybe a little bit more about some of those tools you mentioned, like benefit finding and how you help people grow after their traumas?
Right. So post-traumatic growth is a very well-known construct, whether we've had a name for it or not. And it's something that's been examined in philosophy and religious studies. Um, Psychology was slower to the ball, the belt, the last bell to the ball, if you will. But essentially, it's the acknowledgement that there has been a crisis, a trauma, if you will, and I should say that in defining a trauma, it's not just the major things we think about, like being in war or natural disasters and of course, any other types of human-induced catastrophes against one's person, witnessing those, learning about them can have a traumatic effect, but also having an experience that kind of causes life to be looked at as before and after this thing that happened. So, and in doing so, what that after period entails in terms of the journey, in terms of whether people stay in a traumatized state and that begins to then influence their personality and way of being, or if people are able to engage in certain cognitive and emotional strategies and styles so that they can move forward in their journey with this almost um, counterbalance of distress and growth. So post-traumatic growth means essentially it's what happens in the aftermath of a trauma or a crisis event, being able to look at it and see the nuggets therein. So post-traumatic growth is generally measured with a few domains, one of them being like increases in personal strength, feeling more connected to one's community and family, an appreciation for life, um, changes in one's relationship to spirituality, God, and being able to rely on oneself more. So, we hear about people who say, I'm wiser because of what I've gone through. Not thankful that I went through the unpleasant thing, but I do recognize what I'm able to carry forward with me that can help me along my journey. So for me, looking at after diagnosis with HIV, um, are people experiencing any of these positive byproducts of their experience? The sample that I looked at had mostly been diagnosed more than 10 years with HIV in particular because of the significant journey that people go through upon being diagnosed. You wouldn't really even want to look for post-traumatic growth under 2 years post-diagnosis. So I had people who were kind of well into their journey, but some were still in a traumatized space in a sense of like how they presented during the assessment, the things that had been going on in their lives, and just the way in which they understood their experience. Those who demonstrated post-traumatic growth more than likely, had more substantive social networks. Even if they were fewer in number, they were very high quality. they were able to recount experiences and really view what happened to them, to their bodies, the changes as a catalyst to moving forward in life, differently or with more clarity, with more intention. Um, so being able to essentially not allow it to be the end of them, but even a new beginning for them.
It's such a beautiful journey to be able to support people in recognizing. I would imagine that one of the interesting things about going through these things is you're so in it. I know with my own life experience, it's only after the fact that somebody might say, oh, that was post-traumatic growth, and kind of say, why, yes, I guess it was. Because when you're in it, you're just doing what you need to do to get by. And it's beautiful to have you zoom out the lens for us and sort of narrate what that process could look like and be like for a person. And I know that now you run a private practice in Brooklyn. You see people both locally in New York, but then also remotely online. Who are some of the people that you work with in your practice, and what are some of the ways that you continue to integrate positive psychology into how you work with people?
Yeah, so I tend to work really well with predominantly women. I do work with men as well, but I would say my practice is probably geared toward women who are um, usually they're dealing with some type of anxiety, stress, overwhelm, but very much values and purpose driven types of individuals who need some support in managing the way in which stress and things show up in their bodies and their relationships, navigating difficult environments. I work with folks who are living with chronic health conditions. We just talked about HIV, but any condition for which you need treatment over 3 months, that is going to have a significant impact on one's life and well-being and relationships. So, supporting folks and their family members who are going through that. I work also within the Black diaspora, supporting communities through local events, in Brooklyn nowadays. And just really, with the climate of really our world, it can be very heavy to be a person of color navigating different spaces. So I really do value being able to provide support in different venues, if you will, for folks who may not, you know, find themselves as readily in a therapy room due to internalized stigma and things of that nature. So making myself accessible and, the World Wide Web helps with that so much. I really value accessibility. So my practice is predominantly virtual. Um, and, that means a lot to me because, of being someone who is very intimately connected with those living with chronic illnesses and also being someone who lives with a chronic illness. So it's work, it's personal, and just understanding how, yes, there's a way in which we, traditionally do things, but changing it up a bit so that we can make it more readily accessible and available to others, it makes sense. So taking my practice virtual made sense, especially looking at those who I was working with. And then there was another question.
And the other question was, what are some of the ways that you bring positive psychology into what you do?
Positive psychology is infused into my practice from the word go. Um, because of my long-term relationship with positive psychology, it's inevitable that, how I even conceptualize my business would have that infused to it. So, thankfully, having been able to study under your tutelage, I was able to complete the applied psych um, certification. So I make sure people know about that. That I have advanced training in applied positive
Thank you for
psychology
that.
because yes, it is one of the highlights of my career for me, being able to finally dive into and immerse myself into it. So I let them know that from the beginning. I let them know that because of this training, I'm bringing to bear different tools and even frameworks to not just help them from the standpoint of what the medical model focuses on, which is symptom reduction. But I'm concerned with, once we get you back to baseline, you know, are you able to cultivate a sense of thriving and flourishing? So this is part of my intake spiel and about how I work with folks, so I let them know it's going to be a hybrid model, when you work with me. You're going to get the therapy, but then there's also a coaching framework and a coaching aspect where I am, very curious about your vision for your life and how you wish to be in the world and, the values that pull you forward that really, help you feel grounded and balanced and how you then can set really, flexible goals to help you along the path of becoming who you want to be and how you want to show up in the world. So I let people know from the jump that this is very much a part of how I work with them and will engage with them. And very often, and very early into treatment, I'm drawing from positive psychology to help with, patient care.
That's beautiful. And I would imagine that for many people, it's just such a breath of fresh air to hear somebody go about things in this wellness approach that we talk about, where we're not just going to stop when we get you back to baseline, that there's this desire to look at what does it mean to live well and to help you flourish and to create the life that you're wanting to live. So I love that. And I'm curious, what are some of the ways in which you integrate positive psychology interventions or theories into how you live your life and what supports you?
Yeah, positive psychology is definitely infused into my own personal life in a very significant way. You'll see that a lot of the things that I consume are about optimizing our human experience and how to facilitate thriving and to cultivate the changes we want to make. And so even in my own life, I'm using my understanding of positive neuroscience and, what it really takes to build habits and establish new routines to, support the things that I'm wanting to do just, personally, little tweaks that I want to make into how my, day-to-day experience goes. I'm able to tap into this wealth of knowledge and, even go to, positive psychology tools, that I've amassed through the Flourishing Center program and other resources to, do my own check off lists of like qualities. I assess myself for gratitude. I assess myself in terms of my character strengths, like where am I? Just as a person because I want to show up as authentically as I can for my clients. Of course, I'm purpose driven in that way, but I want to show up really well for me. I want to show up really well for my family, and that process, being able to show up well in life takes work. But I think with understanding even just what's going on in the brain and on a hormonal level and electrical, magnetic level of our um, human experience, that can give us a little bit more energy on our journey, help us get a little bit further than we were able to get the last time we made an attempt or, than what we thought we would get. So I am constantly um, thinking of things from a positive psychology framework even.
I love that. And I'm curious, what are some of the neuroscience principles that support you? I know that for me, this has been a huge part of positive psychology that I'm constantly being very aware of in my day-to-day life.
Mhm, mhm. Well, because I've been working on habits and routines, and I really like to think of it as rhythms because I'm noticing language as well in terms of habits and routines have somewhat of a negative connotation to me. So rhythms is kind of how I'm liking to think of things. But looking at it from a brain standpoint of what's happening, when we're looking to change something that is very well automated, right? So knowing that the way I explain it to folks is like your brain's doing what it's supposed to do. It is there to protect the status quo, if you will, meaning, your beliefs, your way of life, getting your instincts involved for, self-protection, releasing hormones. It's about your safety. So you can't blame it when you're trying to change something, change a part of the status quo that is going to, give you a hard time with that. So looking at let's understand that this is what's going on so you can facilitate, so we can help folks have a little bit more patience with themselves, a little bit more compassion toward their experience, and being able to get over that hurdle where you want to give up, where you think that all these efforts are not adding up to anything. It's not feeling easier. It still feels like a chore. It's just you're maybe slacking off more than you want to. But I like to use this little nugget of neuroscience to say that, to help further support the process of like pressing forward, even though those emotions and physiological things show up. So being able to, have this data point um, on the table when we're thinking about what we want to do, if we want to continue or if we want to, kind of go back into the familiar past. So being able to say like, when you're working on a new pathway, a new neural pathway, it's got to be repeated, and performed enough so that you can build up muscle memory, so you can get used to it, so it can become something you think of in more intense moments. Um, being able to um, really, dive into your experience in a different way and view it from a different lens so that you can cross that hurdle of wanting to give up. Because usually it's pretty soon thereafter where there's like a switch or click or twist in the brain where the brain and body are like, oh, this is what we're doing now? Okay. And then it begins to feel like a new normal. Then there's a bit of ease that comes. Then you notice like, oh, this doesn't feel as hard or difficult as it did a few weeks ago. And it's subtly you ease into it and kind of settle into the new thing. But we have to be able to coach ourselves through, love ourselves through the tough moments so we can get to the other side. But I think the infusion of that positive neuroscience into this type of explanation can be very helpful for folks.
I love that. I know that for myself when I'm working with neuroscience of habit change, I work a lot to integrate primers into what I do, which is different stimuli in my environment to remind me of what I'm looking to stay focused on because I know that I get really excited with the novelty of something new, whether it be a new journal approach that I want to do or a new meditation technique or a new workout that I'm starting. And after the novelty wears off, that's where the real work begins. And I really need to make sure that I have systems in place to keep my brain focused on this is the new change that we're taking on. And so it's definitely been a huge part of what I've explored as to how to make these changes over time is to think about what does my brain need? So when I'm looking to get back into a workout routine, I know that I need to make sure that I've got lots of ways of working out all around me that creates the least amount of resistance possible. And then if I have to travel too far or take too long, or if I have to take out equipment in order to be able to do it, I'm not going to be as likely to do it because I have an unconscious part of my brain that wants to do the thing that will be the easiest. And so I definitely can resonate with how much just thinking about learning about the brain and what we're wired for has helped me tremendously in sustaining habit change.
And even as you're speaking, I'm thinking of the fact that so I'm thinking of the objections my clients would have, right? It's like, that's too much work to like plan these things, because I'm thinking it takes a level of like, you have to sit down and kind of think about how you're going to, um, you know, allow your environment to really be this very positive, encouraging force in what you're doing. So, yes, it's going to feel like work. It's going to require some forethought, but being able to set yourself up so that your environment works with you and even for you feels a lot different and feels so much better than, the contrary. So being able to support people with that sense of like, this shit is hard. I'm sorry, May. I don't know if I can cuss.
Of course you can. Of course you can, because that shit is hard, right? Habit change is so hard. And what happens is when people don't take the time to, when people aren't given the opportunity to learn about how their mind works and how their body works, they set a goal or they're trying to work out a habit and then they fail and they think that there's something wrong with them and they make what I call a person problem out of an environmental problem. So they say, I don't have willpower or I just can't do it, where really it might have been that they just needed to go about their goal in a different way.
Absolutely. Yeah, I definitely reference that a lot in helping people to understand, you know, when they're personalizing way more than what's necessary, and like, you know, the lens that needs to be applied is much more context and behaviorally focused than what they do. When I say you question your whole um, beingness, your whole personhood is now up under investigation because, of something that happened when, really it's more so about the specific context. So, a contextual behavioral science approach I really do value because, the way in which things are structured in our society really is that we're so out of touch with the results that we're getting in life. We're so out of touch with the fact that the things that we're doing repetitively just aren't working for us. We don't know how to evaluate that at all. So being able to support people in kind of being able to see things differently with a different lens, is something that I really appreciate about the work that I do and what positive psychology has enabled me to do even better, I believe.
That's beautiful. So my final question before we ask you how people can find you if they're interested in working with you or learning more about your approach, we always end our positive psychology practitioner profiles with asking our guest, what is a self-care practice that nurtures and nourishes you, as we know that our motto is that self-care is healthcare. So what's something you do to support your well-being?
What comes to mind really is when in my bedroom, I've erected an altar. I have, things that I find sacred there. I have pictures of loved ones that I've lost there. I have crystals and cowrie shells and um, vintage and antique metal pieces. Things that represent the elements. And what I like to do is, light some candles. I put on some African drumming music, and I may even tie a kente cloth around me, and I dance. And I allow the, rhythms to move me. I just really dive into the sound waves, if you will, and a session of that. It usually ends in a meditation, of me like lying down on a yoga mat or something and just receiving. And um, then I'll fall asleep. So, but it is just so, it's so nurturing. It gets me, I spend a lot of time sitting and talking. So being able to move my body in this very, sacred space and, with the intentions of just receiving, to unload, kind of, I would say the initial dancing is like just kind of releasing things that have built up, releasing pressure. But it does shift into a receptive mode. So I'm able to, kind of engage my energy differently. So I really appreciate that. And it's something that, I can tell when it's been a while type of thing.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much, Chanel, for sharing that. It's such an important thing for people to have practices that help them downregulate their nervous system. And that sounds like a really, really yummy one. So Shenell, how can people learn more about you and your work?
I can be found on the internet at drshenell.com. So it's DRSHENELL.com. And you'll find a brief bio. You'll find links to an online scheduling system if you're interested in pursuing that. There's a link for a free 20-minute consultation because I think it's important to be able to know what you're walking into before you get, quote unquote, to the door. In my case, to the, webcam. Um, but being able to have that initial consultation to see if there's goodness fit. I like to provide that to people, so I do free 20-minute consultations. Again, that's drshenell.com.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for being a part of this, Shenell. It's been just such a joy to connect with you, and thank you for the work you do in the world.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
This Practitioner Profile episode is brought to you by the Certificate in Applied Positive Psychology program, the world's fastest growing practitioner training with over 15 programs running every year in 5 cities and online internationally. Discover how you too can turn your passion for well-being, science, and helping others into a career where you help people thrive. Learn more about how you can become a certified positive psychology practitioner at getcertifiedinpp.com.
Thanks for listening. I hope you've enjoyed this podcast. I want to encourage you to tell us, what would you love to hear more about? Is there an area of positive psychology you would love to get some more information on in terms of the research? Give us a shout out at info@theflourishingcenter.com. Thank you so much for listening, and I wish you a wonderful flourishing day.